5. If you've made it this far, you've done a lot of things so far. On this particular one, we're really going to be wrapping up what we've been working on. So the first thing you'll want to do is just go back and listen to your mix with some fresh ears. We've been changing a lot of things. We've been changing volume levels. We've been putting effects on. We've been panning and doing all these things. And sometimes in the process of that, what started out as a nice balanced mix can kind of get out of balance. And so I would recommend that you go back and adjust some faders, adjust your levels, get things back in balance. Listen again to just one track at a time, or comparing two tracks and see how they're balanced with each other. Um, it's always a good time to just go back and check things before you move on to this final step. So rebalance. And then what we're going to be looking at in this one really is your overall level. So over here on your master track, that's taking all of this into account. Everything goes to your master track before it comes out to your headphones. And I generally don't mess with the fader on the master track. I like to keep that right at 0. But what we're going to do now is we're going to look at what our levels are on that master fader, and we're going to make some adjustments to the overall mix by making some adjustments on the master fader. So first of all, again, I'm going to go to this kind of loud spot in the mix because I think that's a good spot to kind of start with. And we'll push play. I'm going to bring the volume way down just so we can look. So this is our overall volume levels right now, and you can see everything's looking really good right now, actually. We're hovering right around -12, which is right where I want us. There's some times where it's a little bit less than that. There's some times where it's a little bit more than that. But in general, it's kind of hovering around -12, and that's kind of your target goal for your average spot on your mix. Definitely, if you're seeing any red lights coming up on any of your tracks, that's a bad thing. That means that track is clipping, and that usually happens from some kind of effect processing that you put on. So if you were, for instance, EQing your kick drum, and you did a really big boost on it. Let me go ahead and do this so we can see. You can see how that's going into the red right now, and it's also making my overall mix go into the red every time that kick drum happens, right? So I went too big on that boost, right? And so now's a good time, like I say, if you're seeing any of those red lights, and hopefully you were catching those earlier, but now if you're seeing any red lights, try and find out where that's happening and what's causing it to happen. EQ is often a guilty culprit. Also the compressor, you want to watch out for how much output you're adding, and is the makeup gain on or not. That can really make a big difference in your volume levels, right? So we want to try and really zero in on getting that -12 as our average spot where that's hanging out. But we also want it to, go full tilt. When it goes full tilt, we want it to get up there. And, we do want it to breathe a little bit still. So I do want to see some variation in my sound. I don't want it to just stay right at 12 the whole time. That wouldn't be a good mix either. So there's some effects that we can actually use just specifically on the master fader that are made specifically for really getting those levels in control. And one of them in specific is called a limiter. And if I open this up, you can see there's some different settings on here. I'm going to grab this one that I like to use quite a bit on the master fader called upper ceiling. And we'll just click on that and drag it all the way over to the master fader. And again, any effects you put on the master fader are going to affect everything, right? So generally there's not one effect that I put on everything, but a limiter is one of those things. And like I say, I'm going to push play again and just kind of look at my mix. There's a number right here that's next to all of the faders, this number right here, and that you can see how that's kind of changing over time. What that reflects is that's the loudest point that track got to. So the loudest that this one ever got to is -2.5. And you can see individually where these all are at. Okay. So the reason why I point that out is that's basically how much wiggle room you have on your track to turn the whole thing up and not cross the 0 point, right? So with the limiter, it's a really simple effect. What I generally like to do with it is just mess with the gain and the ceiling. So the ceiling is how loud you will absolutely let your mix to go, and we know we can't go over 0 anyway. But I usually will lower this just a little bit, like -0.03. Sorry, -0.03. Gotta put the minus in there. Oh, it's not letting me do that. Well, just bring it down one little titch, and if you want, you can hold down Shift, or I'm sorry, Command when you drag down Shift, and then it will move in smaller increments. Sometimes it's really jumpy when you're doing it, but 0.03 is generally where I try and get it. It's not wanting me to let me do that. We'll go with 0.04 if it doesn't let me do 3. It's just barely under 0 is really all it is, right? And I do that just, maybe it's out of superstition, but just to make sure that I don't ever get to the 0 point, right? And then the next thing I do is I really pay attention to this number right here, and that's kind of like where I start with my gain. So if it says I can add 2.5 and still be safe, I'm going to start there and just see what happens. So I'm going to... And at this phase, you really can just look at the meters and get a really good idea for where you're at. If you've been paying really close attention to how it sounds while you've been mixing and it sounds good, I'm not saying you don't need to listen to your track at this point, but I am saying that there's a reason why we have all this visual feedback and that these things are telling us where we're at so that we know how loud our mix is. Depending, and it's not dependent on what headphones we're listening to or what kind of system we're listening it out of. It's just this is the actual file volume level. So that's looking really good. That's, like I say, we're trying to average around -12 in general. And right now I'm looking at like the loudest spot in the song, and so that tells me I'm really good. But I might want to go, to like a really quiet spot in the song also. Like maybe here looks kind of quiet. And you can see I'm kind of hovering below -12 a little bit there, right? So just to kind of give you some perspective on where you're going to be with all of this. So once you get to the place where your overall levels are looking good, there's nothing in the red, you're hovering around 12, it sounds good. Really your last step is just kind of tucking in the last little bit, and we've probably spoken in class and you've probably noticed there's actually 2 takes of this song on here because they recorded it once and then they recorded it again just to be safe. I think the first take's the better one, and so what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to select from here all the way over, and I'm just going to delete all that stuff that we don't need. And then also I'm gonna really like zoom in close here and see if I can find right where that song starts. Something soloed. Yeah, so right about there. So I don't need all this spot in the beginning either, so I'm going to just select all that also and delete that. Make sure you don't move any tracks around or things won't be in sync anymore. And we can zoom in at the end here and get this cut a little bit tighter too. You want to make sure that you don't cut out the tail end too much. I like to leave a little bit of that because that's kind of the sound in the room kind of dying down, right? That's looking a lot better. So now we got a real clean start and end place. And then the last thing I like to do is I always like to do a nice fade out on the end. And you can do that real easy on individual tracks, fade ins and fade outs. If you just hover over the track itself, you can click on these little squares and that will let you just draw in a nice little subtle fade out at the end here. And I like to just do a little one. Now if you wanted to do like a long slow fade out at the end, you could, something like that. You can see how it kind of like takes it away as we go. But for this song, they make a pretty nice clean ending, and so I just want to just kind of take a little bit off the end, and what that's going to do is just kind of make that last fade out to silence nice and smooth. Just go in and just do this on all the tracks, and it's okay if they're a little bit different from each other, but you basically want them all to be on about the same fade out. Sometimes I've faded out some instruments early, and then you can also do that on the beginning, just so there isn't like a sudden bam, we're in the room and the sound is going right. But again, make sure you don't cut off stuff that is part of the song, part of the stuff that you want there. So just little bits like that. So that's fade in and fade out. And then I'll do the last video just showing you how to export and turn that into. So that's it for this one.